The shivering cry the cold wind howled through the barren landscape, its icy fingers reaching out and biting at anything in its path. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of a storm, and the frozen ground seemed endless. The world felt empty, as though it was waiting for something important. In the distance, the only movement came from the lone figure struggling against the wind. A small, fragile figure stumbled through the snow-covered terrain. She was an alien, a creature unlike anything the humans had seen. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her long silver hair whipped around her face as the wind tore at it. She had never been this far from her people, but it didn't matter now. She had no choice. The cold was unbearable. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, and each breath was a struggle, leaving her weak and trembling. Her name was Lyra, and she was alone, stranded on a hostile world with nothing but the bitter wind and snow to keep her company. She had no idea where she was, or even how she had ended up here. All she knew was that she was freezing, her body shutting down, and her heart racing with fear. She had been running for so long, but the cold was relentless. There was no warmth, no shelter, just endless cold. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she took another step, her vision blurring. She was exhausted, and the freezing air made it hard to breathe. Her body was slowing down, her movements becoming more sluggish. The cold was getting into her bones, and she felt it, the overwhelming pull of hopelessness. She wasn't going to make it. Then, through the haze of snow and ice, she saw it. A flicker of movement. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be it a person? Someone who could help her. She didn't know how long she had been walking, but the thought of safety was enough to keep her going. With the last ounce of strength she had left, she stumbled toward the figure. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she struggled to push through the snow, her vision growing dimmer with each step. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but her throat was too dry, and her voice barely came out as a whisper. The figure turned, and Lyra's heart sank as she saw that it was a human. He was tall, strong-looking, with dark, messy hair and a rugged appearance. He seemed out of place in this cold, empty world, but his eyes were what caught her attention. They were soft, full of curiosity, but there was something else in them, something kind. Something that made her feel, for the first time in what felt like forever, like maybe she wasn't alone. Lyra's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground, her body too weak to stay upright. The snow beneath her felt like ice, and she shivered uncontrollably. She looked up at the human through bleary eyes, but her vision was fading fast. She had no energy left to speak, no strength to beg for help. All she could do was hope that the stranger would see her, that he would help her. Her mouth opened, but the only sound that escaped was a faint, desperate whisper. "Please, please." The human took a step forward, his brow furrowed in confusion as he looked down at her. He seemed unsure, his eyes darting around as if searching for something, someone. But there was no one else. It was just her and him, alone in the vast, frozen wilderness. Lyra could feel the cold creeping deeper into her bones, and the world around her seemed to darken. Her head felt heavy, and her eyelids grew heavy with sleep. She fought to stay awake, knowing that if she closed her eyes now, she might never wake up again. She tried once more to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm freezing." The human knelt down beside her, and Lyra's heart fluttered with what little hope she had left. He was close now, so close. She could see the concern in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he reached for her. But she couldn't hold on any longer. The cold was too much as her eyes closed. She thought about the promise she had made to herself, the promise that she would survive. She had to survive. But as darkness overtook her vision, the last thing she felt was the warmth of a hand gently lifting her, pulling her close. A strange, fleeting comfort spread through her chest. The human had seen her, heard her cry, and had reached out. And for the first time in a long while, Lyra let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could help her. The human's decision, the human knelt beside the alien girl, her body limp in his arms. Her skin was so cold, her breathing shallow. The wind howled around them, biting into his exposed skin, but he hardly noticed. His mind was racing. What had he gotten himself into? The wilderness surrounding them was merciless. And yet, here he was, holding an alien in his arms, someone who might be the very thing he had been taught to fear. He studied her closely, his eyes searching for any sign of deception. Her silver hair tangled in the snow, and her pale face looked almost angelic in the dim light. But what was she really? Was she the creature of nightmares the old tales spoke of? Or was she simply another lost soul, desperate for help? A wave of doubt flooded his chest, but something within him, something deep, pushed it aside. She was alive. That was all that mattered. In that moment, she was just a person who needed help, and he had the power to give it. He glanced around. The bleak landscape. There was nothing but snow and ice as far as the eye could see. He couldn't leave her here to die. No matter who or what she was, he couldn't leave her alone. His conscience wouldn't allow it. But the choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. His life could be in danger. He could be leading a dangerous predator into his shelter. What if she turned on him? What if she was part of some alien faction that would hunt him down once they realized she had been taken in? A chill ran down his spine, but he ignored it. This was a decision, not a choice of fear. With a deep breath, he gently lifted her into his arms. Her body was light, but the cold had taken its toll. The freezing air made her skin feel like ice against his. Still, he didn't hesitate. He couldn't. "Hang in there," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. Carefully, he began walking toward his shelter, every step a struggle against the biting wind. The way back felt longer than it should have. He could barely feel his own fingers anymore, but his concern for her was stronger than any pain he was enduring. He had to get her out of the cold. His thoughts kept spinning. Could he trust her? Could he believe that she was just a lost traveler, like he had been before he found this place? Or was there more to this than he understood? The unknown had always been a part of life, but this was different by the time he reached his shelter. His legs were numb from the cold, but his sense of urgency pushed him forward. He quickly opened the door and rushed inside. The warmth of the fire inside a stark contrast to the icy world outside. He laid her gently on a blanket, his hands trembling as he tried to assess her condition. The alien girl didn't stir. She lay there, eyes closed, her breathing still weak but steady. He sighed in relief, but knew it wasn't over yet. Her life was in his hands now. He moved around the shelter quickly, grabbing whatever supplies he had. It wasn't much, but he could try to warm her up. He stoked the fire, adjusting the logs to make it burn hotter. Her chances of surviving depended on him. There was no turning back now. As he worked, his mind drifted back to her earlier words. "Please, I'm freezing." The desperation in her voice still haunted him. What if she was telling the truth? What if she was a victim just like him, caught up in something larger than both of them? He didn't know, and he didn't have answers, but something inside him told him to trust her for now. And so he did. The fire crackled as it grew, warming the small room, and the alien girl began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. For a brief moment, they locked eyes, and he saw a flicker of recognition, of gratitude. "You're safe," he said softly, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. He wasn't sure if she understood him, but the way she looked at him told him everything he needed to know. She was no longer alone, and neither was he. But as the warmth of the fire spread through the shelter, a new fear gnawed at him. He had given her shelter, but now he had to face the consequences of his decision. There were still so many questions left unanswered, and the storm outside was just the beginning. The promise made the warmth of the fire slowly began to thaw Lyra's frozen body. But she still couldn't feel her fingers or toes. Her head swam with dizziness, and for a moment she wondered if it was all just a dream. She had been cold, so cold, and now she was here alive, sheltered. But she couldn't let herself rest yet, not while she still had a promise to keep. As she began to stir, her eyes fluttering open, the human was kneeling beside her, his expression soft but filled with uncertainty. She could feel his gaze on her, and despite the warmth in the room, her chest tightened with anxiety. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. The human hadn't said much since she had entered the shelter. He had only worked silently, stoking the fire, adding logs, and preparing blankets for her. But now, his eyes were full of questions. What was she doing here? What did she want from him? Lyra knew she had to make her intentions clear, or else risk losing the only chance she had left. She slowly sat up, her body still weak, but the warmth in the air gave her the strength to speak. She paused, her throat dry, her voice barely a whisper. I owe you everything. Her words came out in shaky breaths, but she forced herself to continue. I don't know how to repay you for this, but I will. The human watched her silently, his brow furrowed in confusion. He clearly didn't understand her fully, but something in her eyes, the desperation, the sincerity, seemed to reach him. He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him with a raised hand. She needed to explain herself, needed him to understand. I'm not here by choice. Lyra continued, her voice stronger now. I was running from my people. They want me dead. I betrayed them. She looked down, the words heavy in her chest. It wasn't easy to admit, but she knew it was the only way to make him understand. And now, I have nowhere to go. The human's eyes softened, but there was still a flicker of doubt in them. Lyra could see it in his gaze. He didn't trust her, not yet. But how could he? She wasn't from his world, and the stories they told about her kind weren't exactly friendly. But she wasn't asking for his trust. She was asking for his mercy. I'll do anything, she said, her voice growing more urgent. You saved me. You gave me a chance. I'll serve you. I'll stay out of your way. I won't be a burden. Just, please, don't send me out into the cold again. Her eyes locked with his, pleading. The weight of her words hung in the air, as though her very survival depended on his decision. She had nothing left, no home, no family. Only the promise she had just made, the promise to repay him. No matter what it took. The human looked at her, studying her carefully, as if trying to measure her sincerity. It was clear he was still unsure, but he hadn't turned her away. His silence spoke volumes, and for Lyra, that was enough. She knew she wasn't out of danger yet, but she had a chance now, chance to prove that she was more than what her people had cast her as. She waited, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was deciding. Not just her fate, but his own. He could send her away. He could refuse her, leave her to the cold and the dangers that awaited her outside. But then, finally, he spoke, his voice steady but quiet. You can stay, he said, his words a reluctant concession. For now, Lyra's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't rejected her. He had offered her what she needed most, a chance. I promise, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I will make this right. I won't disappoint you. As the warmth of the shelter wrapped around them both, the silence between them shifted. The promise had been made, and now it was time for her to prove that she was more than just a desperate, cold alien in need of saving. She was a survivor, and she would keep her word no matter the cost. The shelter of the fire crackled in the corner, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the shelter. Lyra sat by the warmth, her skin slowly returning to its normal temperature. But the comfort of the heat could not soothe the weight in her chest. The human's offer, his willingness to let her stay, to keep her safe for the moment, was more than she had ever hoped for. But the uncertainty still gnawed at her. What did he expect from her in return? Was he only biding his time, waiting for the right moment to ask for something more? The shelter was modest, a simple structure made of stone and wood, surrounded by the harsh wilderness. It had a warmth to it, though, that made Lyra feel a flicker of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something earthy. And for the first time in what seemed like forever, she allowed herself to relax just for a moment. But then the human's voice broke the stillness, snapping her back into reality. "I'll need to know more about you, Lyra," he said, his tone cautious but not unkind. "What are you really running from? You said your people want you dead." "Why?" Lyra flinched slightly, the memory of her betrayal still fresh, though buried deep. She had hoped to avoid this conversation, but it was inevitable. The human needed answers, and if he was going to keep her in his shelter, she had no choice but to give them. She turned her gaze to the fire, watching the flames as they consumed the logs, her thoughts swirling. "I didn't choose this life," she said quietly. "I was born into a system that values power above all else. My people, my race, believes in strength, dominance, and I." She hesitated, taking a slow breath. "I didn't agree with that. I rebelled. I believed there was more to life than just fighting and conquering." The human watched her intently, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He was quiet, waiting for her to continue. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, but this was the moment. She had to be honest, no matter how much it hurt. "I tried to change things," Lyra continued, her voice soft but filled with pain. "I spoke out against the cruelty. I wanted peace. But they saw me as weak, as a threat to their way of life. So they branded me a traitor. And now?" She paused, swallowing hard. "Now they're hunting me." The silence in the room stretched, and Lyra could almost feel the human processing her words, weighing them against what he knew about her kind, about her species. The aliens were feared, revered in some parts, but considered dangerous in most. How could she expect him to trust her after everything she had revealed? She dared a glance up at him, his expression unreadable. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice steady. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. What would she do now? She had no answers, no plan. All she had was this moment and this shelter, and the strange, flickering bond between her and this human. She wasn't sure if he could ever truly understand her, but at that moment, all she could do was hope he would give her the chance to prove herself. "I will stay out of your way," she said quietly. "I won't be a burden to you. Do whatever I can to help. You saved me, and I will find a way to repay you. But please, don't send me away." The human didn't respond immediately. He sat still for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her. Lyra's heart thudded in her chest. She couldn't stand the uncertainty, but she knew she had no choice but to wait. All she could do was hope that her presence here wasn't a mistake, that she wasn't asking too much. Finally, the human exhaled, standing up and walking toward the fire. He stoked it, adding more wood to keep the warmth going. Then he turned to face her, his expression softer than before. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You can stay. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let my guard down. You're still a stranger, Lyra, "And that means I'm watching you." Lyra nodded, relief flooding her chest. It wasn't a promise of friendship, but it was a promise of safety. For now, she had a chance. "I understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She would prove herself. She would show him that he hadn't made a mistake. She would do whatever it took to earn his trust. As the fire burned brighter, the warmth of the shelter seemed to seep into her bones, but the coldness inside her remained. The danger was far from over. Her enemies were still out there, and she knew they would stop at nothing to find her. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this universe, and that belief, that fragile hope, was enough to keep her going. The secret revealed the warmth of the shelter had settled around them, but Lyra couldn't shake the chill in her bones. Every moment that passed in silence felt heavier than the last. She sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows across the room, but she felt distant, like she was no longer fully part of the world she was in. Her mind kept racing back to the moment when she had first met the human. She had been so desperate, so ready to do anything just to survive. But now, in the safety of this shelter, she found herself facing the hardest thing of all: trust. The human hadn't asked much more from her since he had let her stay. He kept his distance, as though weighing her every action. But something had shifted, and she could feel it. He had given her shelter, but he hadn't fully accepted her yet. And that made the next part of her story even harder to share. She had promised to be honest. She had promised that she would repay him for his kindness. But now, she had to reveal the truth, everything. She had to explain why she had been running, why she had ended up so far from home, so far from safety. She knew the human was still watching her. His quiet presence made her nervous, but it also gave her strength. She could sense his curiosity, his questions lingering in the air, just waiting to be answered. Taking a deep breath, Lyra stood up slowly, her legs still unsteady from the cold. The fire crackled in the background, but the silence between them felt deafening. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth any longer. "I need to tell you why I'm here," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, but firm nonetheless. "Why I'm running." The human raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving her face. "I'm listening." Lyra hesitated. The words felt stuck in her throat, as though she was afraid to say them aloud. But she had no choice. She had to trust. For she ever hoped to have a future. This was the only way forward. "I'm not just any alien," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I was once a part of a group, a faction, back home. We believed in peace, in diplomacy, in finding common ground with others. But the leaders of my people didn't agree with that. They valued power domination, and anyone who opposed them was considered a threat, even if you were just trying to help." She paused, looking away for a moment, her chest tightening with emotion. "I tried to change things. I tried to convince them that there was more to life than fighting and conquering. But it didn't matter. They branded me a traitor. They said I was weak, that I would bring ruin to our kind. So they cast me out." The human didn't say anything, but his expression softened just a fraction. Lyra could see the struggle in his eyes. He was processing her words, trying to make sense of what she was telling him. "They sent hunters after me," she continued, the weight of the truth sinking in. "I've been running ever since. They want me dead. They want to make an example of me." The room felt colder somehow, despite the fire. Lyra took a step closer to the human, her voice steadying as she spoke. "I'm not a warrior," she said, almost to herself. "I never wanted to fight. I just wanted peace. But I became a target, a symbol of everything they feared." The human's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, Lyra saw something different in his eyes, something like understanding. He didn't know her past. He didn't know everything about her, but he was willing to listen. He wasn't rushing to judge her, and that alone made her feel like there was still a chance for her. He stood up slowly, his movements measured, as if processing everything she had said. He didn't look scared or angry, but his expression was serious. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "You're here, you're safe for now, but your people, they'll come for you, won't they?" Lyra swallowed hard. She hadn't wanted to think about what would come next, but the truth was unavoidable. Her enemies were out there, and they would stop at nothing to track her down. She knew that her time in the shelter was limited. The human safety was at risk just by being near her, and that thought made her heart twist in guilt. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't let them find me. I can't let them hurt you." The human studied her for a long moment, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his face. And then, finally, he spoke. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. The words hit her harder than she expected. Together, it wasn't a promise of safety, or a guarantee that everything would be fine. But it was enough. For the first time in a long while, Lyra allowed herself to believe that maybe she wasn't as alone as she had thought. As the fire crackled in the background, the weight of her story hung in the air. But now there was a flicker of hope, a tiny ember that burned brighter with every word exchanged. And for the first time, Lyra dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, this human could be the key to her survival. The air in the shelter felt thicker now, charged with the weight of what had been revealed. Outside, the wind howled relentlessly, a reminder of the world beyond the walls, dangerous, unforgiving, and vast. But inside, there was a different kind of storm brewing. It was a storm of decisions, of consequences, and of the unknown future that loomed ahead of them both. Lyra sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames, though her mind was far from calm. The truth about her past had been laid bare, and the human had accepted it. But as she glanced up at him, sitting across from her, she saw the conflict still written in his expression. He wasn't scared of her, but the tension between them had shifted. He was now faced with a decision, one that would change everything for both of them. The human had given her shelter, a chance to recover, but he hadn't yet decided what to do with that trust. She knew he was struggling with the weight of his decision. Should he continue to help her, knowing that doing so would put him at risk? Or should he send her away to save himself, leaving her to face the cold and the dangers of the alien world? Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had made a promise to him, and now the time had come for her to show that she was worth that trust. But it wasn't just about her. It was about him too. He had risked everything for her, but what would he ask in return? She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, the moment of his decision, was going to be the turning point in their journey. The fire crackled, and the silence stretched between them, suffocating in its heaviness. Finally, the human stood up, walking slowly toward the window. Kea peered out, his eyes scanning the dark landscape beyond the shelter. Lyra could see the tension in his back, his shoulders stiff. He was thinking, weighing the options. His words, when they came, were quiet, measured. "You've told me your story, Lyra," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I believe you, but," he paused, taking a deep breath. "But the truth is, I don't know if I can protect you. I don't know if I can protect both of us from what's coming." Lyra felt the weight of his words settle into her chest like a stone. She had known this moment would come. The moment when he would have to decide whether to stand with her, risking his life, or send her away and continue with his own life, untouched by the chaos she had brought into his world. Her voice shook. As she spoke, her heart in her throat. "I don't want to put you in danger. I never wanted that. But please, I can't go back. I can't face them again. I need you." For a moment, the human didn't respond. He kept his back to her, his gaze lost in the darkness outside. But Lyra could see the tension in his posture, the struggle inside him. He was torn. She could feel it in the very air they shared. But then, slowly, he turned to face her, his expression softening. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said, his voice low. "I didn't ask for you to show up at my doorstep, for you to be in my life. But now that you're here, I can't. Just walk away. You're not just some alien. You're someone who needs help. And I can't leave you out there." Lyra's heart lifted in her chest, but it was a fleeting relief. She could see the struggle still lingering in his eyes. He had made a choice, but it wasn't an easy one. "I'm staying," he said, finally. "But you need to understand something. This isn't just about saving you. It's about surviving. We'll have to face whatever comes together. If we're going to make it out of this alive, we're going to have to trust each other completely. No more secrets, no more hesitation." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she knew that this moment, this decision, had sealed their fate. There would be no turning back now. Lyra stood up slowly, her legs still shaky, but there was a strength in her now. The human had made his choice. And so had she. "I will never betray you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart still raced. "I will fight, with everything I have, to prove that you made the right choice." The human nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We'll need to prepare," he said. "If we're going to face them, we'll need to be ready." Lyra didn't hesitate. She knew what had to be done. The cold wasn't the only enemy they faced, and she had no intention of running anymore. She would stand with him. Together, they would face whatever was coming, and as they prepared for the unknown, the weight of their shared decision settled between them, unspoken but understood. This was at the moment that would define them both. The last stand, the storm outside had intensified, its violent winds pounding against the walls of the shelter. Inside, the fire crackled, casting a soft glow that did little to chase away the unease between Lyra and the human. The quiet was broken only by the howling of the wind and the steady rhythm of their breathing. They had made their decision, and now they had no choice but to follow through. Lyra stood by the window, staring out into the blizzard that raged beyond. The landscape was a blur of white, and she knew that what lay ahead wasn't just the brutal cold. The alien hunters were out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. Every minute that passed felt like a countdown to the confrontation she had been running from. She turned away from the window, her eyes meeting the humans. He was preparing what little weapons and supplies they had. Said much since their conversation, but his actions spoke volumes. He wasn't a soldier, not by any stretch of the imagination, but he was ready to fight for her, ready to stand by her side. That was all that mattered. "I won't let them take you," Kay said, his voice low but firm, his eyes burning with determination. "We'll make our stand here. This is our home now, and I'm not letting them destroy it." Lyra's heart tightened. She had never imagined a human would fight for her, let alone risk his life for someone like her. She had always been an outsider, always running. But now, in this strange, dangerous world, she had found something she never expected, someone willing to stand with her, someone who saw her as more than a fugitive. "They won't stop until they find me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They'll do whatever it takes. But I won't let them take you down with me. This is my fight too. I won't hide anymore." The human nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. He picked up a makeshift weaponry, blunt object, something he had crafted out of necessity. He handed it to her with a steady hand. "We fight together," he said, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "If they come for us, we stand our ground. We don't run." Lyra took the weapon, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like everything. She was no longer just the alien girl who had been abandoned and hunted. She was someone's ally, someone's partner in survival. Together, they gathered what they could: few scraps of gear, some supplies, and their makeshift weapons. The human checked the door one last time, securing the shelter as best as he could. Lyra did the same, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The human's resolve was comforting, but she couldn't deny the fear that gnawed at the edges of her heart. What if they weren't strong enough? What if the hunters were too many, too powerful? But then she looked at the human again, standing tall, unwavering. In that moment, she realized that it didn't matter how many they were. It didn't matter what odds they faced. They had each other as the storm outside raged with increasing intensity. The unmistakable sound of footsteps reached their ears, rhythmic crunching in the snow, growing closer with every passing second. The hunters had found them. Lyra's pulse quickened, but she stood firm, gripping her weapon tightly. The human moved beside her, his presence a shield she hadn't realized she needed. They were about to face the unknown together, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. "Ready?" the human asked, his voice a steady whisper amidst the growing chaos outside. Lyra took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the door. The wind screamed in the background as though nature itself was warning them, urging them to run. But she wasn't running anymore. "I'm ready," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Let's do this." And just as the door creaked under the pressure of the approaching enemies, Lyra and the human braced themselves for the fight of their lives. The storm outside wasn't the only battle they would face, was the fight for survival. The fight to protect each other and the fight for their future. As the door burst open, they charged forward, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Together.